Welcome back to my channel for another review of a very special lens shot on the new Nikon Z9. And I can tell you right now I'm very excited about this video because the lens I have mounted here on my Nikon Z9 is a classical lens. It's a Carl Zeiss Otus 1.4 28mm. And many years back, I remember that very well, the Otus line from Carl Zeiss was setting the standard, setting the benchmark. These were the state-of-the-art lenses, super expensive. If you could afford them, you were happy with them for a lifetime. And of course, I was tempted to mount this lens now on the new Nikon Z9 with the adapter. Of course, we'll get into all the details in a moment, and using it for landscape photography. And I can tell you right now, the results are mind-blowing. This is really a lens recommendation I wanted to provide to people following me on my channel and to everybody who is watching this video. And now let's get started. Carl Zeiss clearly plays in the top league of lens manufacturers in photography. And in the Carl Zeiss portfolio of lenses, for instance, for Canon cameras and Nikon cameras, the Otus line has always been very famous for delivering outstanding image quality if combined with the right camera. When I talk about these lenses and pronounce the name Otus, and when I listen to my Anglo-American fellows on YouTube dealing with cameras and gear, it always makes me a little bit smiling, because when we say Otus, we clearly do not give justice to the origin of the word, because the origin of the word very likely comes from the ancient Greek otos, or otos you might want to say, and is referring to a horned or eared owl. And clearly owls have super sharp eyes, in particular seeing in the dark, and that's exactly what this lens here is standing for. This lens is available for the Canon EF system, but you can use it of course on the Canon R system if you use the usual adapter. And this lens here in particular is also constructed for the Nikon F mount, and I use here the usual FTZ adapter, which very often is shipped in a bundle with Nikon C cameras, so I can mount it on the camera body. The lens is calculated for full frame sensors, and it's a fully manual lens. So there is no autofocus here, everything happens manually. And you have here an aperture control ring, and you see already here the widest open aperture on that lens is a 1.4. And then you can stop down all the way to an f16, and at f16 it also locks in. Then you can no longer turn it, and the reason is that the aperture ring is not controlling the aperture if this lens is mounted with an adapter on Nikon C cameras, for instance. You will lock it in at f16, then it sits firmly, and then you control the aperture, for instance, with one of the control wheels on the camera. The lens is very large and very heavy, and the Nikon Z9 camera body already is heavy, and this lens contributes another 1350 grams to the overall weight of this camera lens combo. The filter size of the lens is 95mm, so if you want to purchase a UV filter or a polar filter or maybe a protector, I would recommend a protector on this lens. Then it will not be super cheap, because 95mm is quite some size. If you want to protect that expensive lens by a filter or protector, then be warned, don't go for the cheap ones, because they will ruin the image quality. If a bad glass is screwed in front of an excellent lens, the lens will no longer be excellent, because everything will pass through that glass or protector first, and you will have paid all that money for nothing. The minimum focusing distance, manual focus, as I said before, for this lens is 0.3 meter, and the field of view diagonally is 75 degrees, and you have a magnification ratio of 1 divided by 5.5. So almost 20%, which means you can get quite close with that lens to the subject, and you can also use it for close-up type situations. The construction of the lens is quite complex. So we talk here about 16 elements in 13 groups, and that is quite some complexity from an optical perspective. So how is it working with that lens camera combo? First of all, we talk about, give or take, as I said before, in combination 3 kilograms in your hands, and that's quite some weight. Second, you need to get used to manual focus, but on the Nikon Z9, of course, like on almost any camera I know, you have focus peaking and magnification, and that should help and do the trick. I will illustrate this in a second. And I have here locked in the aperture ring at f16, as you can see. And now I can control the aperture with the front wheel here. So if I turn the front wheel, you see how the aperture is changing. Now I'm widest open at f1.4. Then I start to stop down, and I can stop down all the way to f16. Let's do this quickly. Here it ends, and now let's open it again. And of course the ISO value and the shutter speed is changing accordingly here, because I'm currently in aperture priority. For focusing the lens, I recommend to go for magnification first. So I zoom or crop into the scene in front of me. So here is the new Leica M11, for instance, and then I use that super fine, super smooth focus ring to find focus, and then I take the shot. Very good. So let's see if this played out. Let's zoom in. And I think we see here that Leica camera is super sharp, set in scene by that manual focusing procedure. I showed earlier that button here which unlocks the aperture control ring. So if I go to some other value than f16 where it is locked in, I get the message on the screen here saying lock lens aperture ring at minimum aperture, largest f number, which basically means you cannot use the aperture control ring in the way you would like to use it. You have to lock it in at f16, and then you can use the front wheel or the rear wheel depending on what you have set up in the menu, and then you can steer the aperture. In order to illustrate what you can get in terms of sharpness at the minimum focusing distance, but also in terms of background blurriness, I have again my model here from the TV sequel The Witcher, and this character is always very happy to work with me on these type of experiments. Let's go on the lens to the minimum focusing distance here. So I said before this is 0.3 meter, and you see this here on the metric and the scale. And now since we have focus peaking, we'll see how this kicks in. So I can now move forth and back the camera, and in this way hit or hit not with my focus the model. And let's take a shot. I think this is good here. And let's see how this image looks like. So let's go into play mode here. Let's find our model. Let's start to zoom in here. Let me get this centered. And I think this is a sharp image. I was focusing in particular on the eyes and the eyebrows, and you see this looks really good. What you also see here is the very smooth background blurriness. And clearly that's coming from a widest open f1.4 and the minimum focusing distance we have. And that is something photographers appreciate, of course. And in general, when it comes to image quality, sharpness, clarity, the lack of distortion, it will get much better when we look into landscape in the course of the video and into my sample images. The build quality of the lens is beyond any doubt. If you look at that focus ring here, it's buttery smooth. I wish from time to time the travel way would be a bit longer, and it is a long travel way compared to other lenses you find, but it could be a bit longer. And I think the role model in terms of travel way, which I have in my Nikon lens portfolio, is the Nikon Noct for the Nikon C series. And here the travel way is almost never ending. And that helps for super precise focusing. I mentioned this in a couple of videos on my channel, and this clearly is superior in terms of travel way on the focus ring than what you have on the Otus here. But the Otus is good nevertheless, and you can very precisely focus with that focus ring here, and you will see later in my landscape sample images that it also worked very well in practice. What I want to do now is I want to introduce my shooting location. I will show sample images from landscape photography because this lens is built for landscape photography. It is so fantastic to have a 28mm focal length in a landscape situation, and since the lens is super sharp, since you can shoot it widest open at f1.4, it kind of sees in the night, not as much as the Nikon Noct here, which I showed before, but good enough to get, in particular in low light situations, excellent results in image quality. The frame you just saw was a 15.1K times 4.4K panorama shot stitched together in Lightroom, or you can do this in Photoshop, of 3 different frames. And it captures the whole valley in front of me on that shooting location. And if you look at the shooting parameters here, it's a 15-second exposure, shot widest open at f1.4, ISO 100. And I think the image quality coming from that lens in combination with the new Nikon Z9 is just mind-blowing. And you saw that when I cropped in the video, but if I do this here in Lightroom, it is a bit more steady. And if you look at that, this is just really, really exciting what you get if you mount this Carl Zeiss Otus 1.4 on the Nikon Z9. Very nice. You see the stars are a little bit trailing because 15 seconds at a full frame sensor is already a bit too long, but I didn't care about that. And here you see famous mountain Rigi in the background with the tower or the antenna on top of it. And it was a bit of a hazy day. We have a lot of fog in that area from time to time. And here it was not super elevated, but you see it a bit in the valley that it is a little bit hazy, but that doesn't discount at all the excellent image quality coming from that lens here. So quite nice also with the light trails here on the streets and lots of details, a very clear and clean image. And I like a lot what I see here. Here one of those single frames I used for the panorama stitching. Again, of course, 15 seconds, widest open f1.4, ISO 100, and then the 45 megapixel native resolution of the Nikon Z9. And if you look here at the foreground, these trees, every tiny little detail is fully visible. Again, in the valley, a little bit of fog or haziness, but that doesn't take away what you see here. And then looking at the houses, the buildings, this is all so rich in detail, which speaks for a super high sharpness of that Otus 28mm f1.4. And I think in general, I was in that landscape shooting super pleased about that lens. It is a fantastic lens. It is a benchmark. It is a classic. And clearly I can fully recommend it to be shot on the Nikon Z9. Here's the last frame I want to quickly comment on. And clearly that lens is absolutely fantastic for astrophotography and night sky. And here, if you look at my shooting parameters, I did shoot now much shorter at only 6 seconds instead of 15 seconds. I also closed the aperture a bit and stopped down from f1.4 to f4.0. And I boosted up the ISO from 100 to 400. And that gives a very nice night shot with trees in the foreground here, which I personally like. And then you have here Orion star constellation, nice and clean, and you see also the stars are no longer trailing now. That looks really good, and the stars look like they're supposed to look. And then you have, of course, the mountains in the background. Again, here in the valley, a little bit of haziness, but in general, I think a good result in astrophotography. And for astrophotographers, that lens with its wide angle with 28mm clearly is a fantastic lens to be shot on a Nikon Z7 Mark II or the Nikon Z9. My conclusion from shooting the lens is very, very simple. If you are in landscape photography, and if in particular like me, you love shooting in low light and at night, like you saw in the sample images, then this lens is for you. It has my full recommendation. By the way, I'm not affiliated in any way with Carl Zeiss. I purchased this lens with my own money, and I'm excited to have it because on the Nikon Z7 Mark II and also in particular on the Nikon Z9, it really delivers from all perspectives. Image quality, sharpness, coloring, rendering, distortion-free images. It is the best you can hope for as a photographer. So my full recommendation for this lens. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel. There is always more to come. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and healthy, and of course, peace out.